Sign it, Ilara. Sign it, or consider yourself a ghost to this family. You owe us $250,000 for the life you stole from your brother, and we're done waiting for your conscience to kick in. The voice didn't belong to a stranger. It belonged to my father, Arthur Vance. He didn't offer a hello, nor did he ask how my flight from Seattle to New York had been. Instead, he slammed a thick, leather-bound folder onto the marble kitchen island right next to my untouched espresso. $250,000? I repeated, my voice coming out like a jagged piece of glass. I didn't look at the paper. I looked at him. You're charging me for the hospital bills from a decade ago? The ones the insurance already covered? Don't you dare bring up insurance! My mother, Eleanor, hissed from the shadows of the dining room, her voice trembling with a rehearsed fragility. Julian lost his career because of you. He was a star athlete, Ilara. He had a future. He threw himself in front of that car to push you out of the way, and look at him now. He struggled for 10 years while you've been living high and mighty in your glass tower, counting other people's money. I turned my gaze to my brother, Julian. He was leaning against the refrigerator, 31 years old, and looking every bit like the professional victim he had become. He was nursing a glass of expensive scotch, likely bought with the allowance my parents squeezed out of their dwindling savings. He didn't look at me. He just adjusted the slight tremor in his hand, a physical tic he used whenever he needed to remind everyone of his permanent trauma. It's $4,200 a month, Ilara, Julian said, his voice smooth and devoid of any brotherly affection. It's a drop in the bucket for a top-tier forensic financial investigator like you. Consider it a subscription fee for still having a family. A surge of white-hot fury roared through my veins, but I didn't let it reach my face. Years of hunting corporate embezzlers had taught me one thing. The person who screams first has already lost the audit. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee. It was cold, bitter, just like the people standing in front of me. A subscription fee, I whispered, the words tasting like poison. You've spent 10 years building a shrine to a hero who doesn't exist. You've treated me like a stray dog you only kept around to eventually harvest for organs, and now you want a piece of my paycheck too? We don't want a piece, Arthur growled, stepping into my personal space. He still had the predatory stance of the precinct captain he used to be. We want what's ours. You've got 48 hours to sign the power of attorney giving us access to your primary investment account. If you don't, I'll make sure every firm on Wall Street knows their star investigator is a cold-blooded traitor who let her own brother rot. I looked at the three of them. They weren't a family. They were a sinking ship, and they were trying to use my life as a lifeboat. They saw a submissive, guilt-ridden daughter who had spent years trying to earn back a love that was never there. What they didn't see was the woman who had spent the last 3 weeks digging through their digital trash. You're right, Dad, I said, my voice suddenly dropping to a calm, clinical tone that made Julian shift uncomfortably. A debt is a debt, and it's high time we settled the books. I reached into my designer handbag and pulled out my phone, placing it face up on the marble counter. I tapped the screen, and a red light began to pulse. What are you doing? Eleanor asked, her eyes narrowing. I'm starting the clock, I said, a predatory smile finally touching my lips. Since we're talking business, let's talk about the actual numbers, because in my world, the ledger never lies. But people lie every single day. The tension in the room thickened until it felt like a physical weight. They thought they had ambushed me in this Manhattan penthouse. They thought I was the prey. They had no idea that I had already set the building on fire, and I was just waiting for them to smell the smoke. The silence that followed my statement wasn't peaceful. It was the heavy, suffocating pressure that precedes a structural collapse. My father's face transitioned from a mask of stern authority to a shade of purplish rage. He looked less like a retired police captain and more like a cornered animal. "What actual numbers are you talking about, Elara?" Arthur demanded, his voice dropping an octave as he slammed his hand onto the marble, rattling my cold espresso. "The numbers are right there in the ledger. The surgeries, the physical therapy, the years we spent carrying your brother while you were off building a glass life for yourself in Seattle." "You mean the surgeries the state of New York already paid for?" I asked. My voice was a scalpel, sharp, precise, and cold. Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her throat in a gesture of practiced cinematic shock. "How can you be so heartless? We suffered. We sacrificed everything to keep this family together after that night." "No, Mother," I countered, leaning back and crossing my arms. "You didn't sacrifice. You embezzled. 3 weeks ago, a security alert hit my phone at 2 a.m. Someone tried to open a $75,000 high-interest personal loan in my name using my social security number and a clumsy forgery of my signature. The digital footprint led me straight back to this penthouse's router. Imagine my surprise when I didn't just find one loan application, but a 10-year trail of breadcrumbs leading to a feast of fraud. I picked up my phone, swiping through the encrypted files I'd spent nights compiling. I locked eyes with Julian. He was suddenly very interested in the ice cubes in his scotch, his permanent hand tremor miraculously stilled by the onset of genuine fear. "Let's talk about the Gospel of St. Julian," I said. "The night you allegedly pushed me out of the way of a speeding car and took the hit. I was 18, terrified, and I believed you because I wanted to believe my brother loved me. But I'm a senior forensic auditor now, Julian. I don't trade in faith, I trade in paper trails. And yours is a disaster." "I have the scars, Elara," Julian shouted, slamming his glass down. He shoved his sleeve up to reveal the jagged line on his forearm. "I felt the bone snap. I felt the metal crush me." "You felt the metal crush you because you were the one behind the wheel," I said, the words hitting the room like a sonic boom. The air seemed to vanish. My mother's face went stark, porcelain white. Not from grief, but from the terror of a criminal realizing the vault has been opened. "I pulled the original, unredacted police report from the archives," I continued, my voice steady. "Not the sanitized version Dad gave me to read. You weren't a hero, Julian. You were driving Dad's cruiser while intoxicated. I was in the passenger seat. You took a corner at 60 miles per hour, hit a parked delivery truck, and panicked. Since Dad was a precinct captain, he did what he does best. He manipulated the scene. He moved me into the driver's seat while I was unconscious, then realized that would ruin my future, the only future in this family worth a damn. So he changed the narrative again. He turned you into a pedestrian savior." "You're lying," Arthur growled, though his eyes were darting toward the hallway. "You're making up stories to avoid your blood debt." "Am I?" I tossed a folded printout onto the table, covering their greasy ledger. "This is a record from the Victims' Compensation Board dated 9 years ago. Claim number 77B. Beneficiaries, Arthur and Eleanor Vance. Total payout for catastrophic injury and rehabilitation, $250,000. I watched the realization hit them like a physical blow. "The state covered every cent of Julian's medical bills because you filed a fraudulent claim, but you didn't spend it on him. I tracked the outflows. You used $85,000 to pay off Julian's gambling debts to some very dangerous men in Atlantic City. You used another $60,000 for the down payment on this very penthouse. You didn't want a daughter, Arthur. You wanted a recurring revenue stream to fund your son's failures. We did it for the family, Eleanor wailed. You did it for a lie, I snapped, and the audit is officially over. The air in the penthouse was thick with the smell of expensive scotch and cheap desperation. My father stood paralyzed, his eyes fixed on the victim compensation board document as if he could make the numbers vanish by sheer force of will. But numbers are stubborn things. Once they are inked into the record, they become ghosts that never stop haunting. You think you're so smart, don't you? Julian sneered, breaking the silence. He stepped away from the fridge, his face contorting into something ugly and entitled. So what if they took the money? I'm the one who has to live with this arm every day. I'm the one who can't hold a steady job because of the trauma. You're a millionaire, Alara. You live in a penthouse in Seattle that costs more than this entire family makes in a decade. You owe us for the sheer luck of being the one who walked away clean. I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt a wave of nausea. I didn't walk away clean, Julian. I walked away with a mountain of manufactured guilt that I carried for 10 years. I worked 80-hour weeks, took every grueling audit, and slept in my office just so I could send you recovery checks. But while I was building a career, you were building a trap. We aren't talking about the past anymore, Arthur barked, his voice regaining some of its gravelly edge. He stepped closer, trying to use his height to cage me against the counter. I don't care what files you found. You aren't leaving this city until that power of attorney is signed. We have debts, Alara. Real ones. This penthouse is underwater, and Julian's latest investment didn't pan out. We need $250,000, and we need it now. Then it's a good thing I've been busy, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that commanded more attention than his shout. You spent the last month planning how to steal my future. I spent the last month dismantling yours. Eleanor's eyes widened. What does that mean? What have you done? I am a forensic auditor, Mother. My entire job is to find assets that people think are hidden and protect them from predators. Did you really think I wouldn't notice when you tried to use my Seattle condo as collateral for a bridge loan last week? You forged my signature on a deed of trust. That's not just family drama. That's a felony. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my cold coffee, watching them. The moment I saw that loan application, I moved. I didn't call the police then because I wanted to see how far you'd go. I wanted to see if there was a single shred of genuine love left in this house. But this lunch? This fake welcome home meal with a ledger on the table? That was the final invoice. Answer the question, Alara, Arthur yelled, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. What did you do? I sold the condo in Seattle, I said simply. 48 hours ago. It was a private, off-market sale to a holding company I control. The equity, all $1.2 million of it, has been moved into an irrevocable spendthrift trust based in the Cook Islands. It is legally untouchable. You can't sue for it, you can't borrow against it, and you certainly can't forge my name to get to it. You sold your home? Eleanor whispered, looking around her own lavish living room as if she could see the foundations cracking. I sold everything, I continued, my heart hammering against my ribs, but my voice remaining a flat, clinical line. The cars, the stocks, the crypto. I've spent the last 72 hours liquidating every asset I own in the United States. As of this morning, Alara Vance is, on paper, a woman with zero net worth and a very small suitcase. You traitor! Julian lunged toward the counter, reaching for my phone, but I snatched it away with a reflex honed by years of being the clumsy sister who had to learn to move fast. "The money is gone, Julian," I said, standing my ground. "And so is the girl you used to bully. You thought you were the ones setting the trap at this lunch, but I'm the one who's been auditing your lives for 3 weeks. And let me tell you, you're deep in the red." Arthur's hand went to the small of his back, a muscle memory reflex from his days carrying a service weapon. He didn't have a gun, but the intent was there. The air in the room shifted from verbal hostility to the sharp, electric scent of impending violence. "You're not leaving," Arthur said, his voice a low, animalistic growl. "You're going to sit at that table, and you're going to find a way to get that money back into a domestic account. I didn't raise a thief." "No," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "You raised an auditor, and the audit is officially turning into a criminal investigation." The air in the penthouse didn't just feel heavy anymore. It felt combustible. In biology, there's a term called an extinction burst, a predictable increase in the frequency or intensity of a behavior when a parasite realizes its food source is about to vanish. I was watching it happen in real time. "You think a few offshore accounts make you untouchable?" Arthur's voice was no longer a growl. It was a roar. He bypassed the kitchen island, his heavy footsteps echoing like hammer blows against the hardwood floor. "I was a captain in this city for 25 years. I know every judge, every clerk, and every hungry lawyer from here to Albany. I'll have those accounts frozen before the sun sets." "You're out of your jurisdiction, Dad," I said, my hand tightening around my phone. "And you're out of time." I moved toward the foyer, my heart thundering against my ribs, but I kept my pace measured. I couldn't show fear. To a man like Arthur Vance, fear was an invitation to strike. But before I could reach the heavy mahogany door, a blur of movement blocked my path. Julian had dropped his scotch. The glass shattered against the floor, amber liquid soaking into a rug that probably cost more than my first car. He stood in front of the exit, his face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. "You're not going anywhere, sis," Julian spat. He reached out with his injured arm, the one he claimed was too weak to lift a grocery bag, and gripped the door handle with the strength of a vice. He twisted the deadbolt. Click. The sound echoed through the hallway like a gunshot. "Julian, move," I commanded, my voice dropping into that low, dangerous frequency I used during hostile takeovers. "Or what?" Julian challenged, stepping closer. "You'll call your lawyer? You'll send a mean email? You're in our house now, Elara, and in this house, you do what you're told." Behind me, I heard Eleanor let out a sharp, jagged sob, but it wasn't a sob of grief. It was the sound of a woman watching her lifestyle slip through her fingers. "Just sign the papers, Elara. Why do you have to be so difficult? We just want to be a family again." "A family doesn't lock the doors, Mother," I screamed, my composure finally fracturing. "A family doesn't forge signatures. A family doesn't build a decade-long extortion plot based on a drunk driving accident." Arthur slammed his fist into the wall next to my head, the drywall cracking under the force. He was inches from my face now. I could smell the stale coffee and the desperation on his breath. "Give me the phone, Elara. Give me the phone and the login for the trust, or I swear to God, I'll give you a real reason to visit the emergency room." This was it. The moment the mask fell completely. There was no hero brother anymore. There was no grieving mother. There was just a pack of predators who had finally realized their prey had teeth. "You want my phone, Arthur?" I asked, holding it up between us. The screen was dark, but the red light was still pulsing. "Hand it over, now." The thing about being a forensic investigator, I said, my voice regained a terrifyingly calm edge, is that we never enter a hostile environment without a backup. You think I came here alone because I'm sentimental? I came here to get a confession. I tapped the screen. It lit up, revealing not a ledger, but an active call. The timer read 24:12. The line has been open since I walked through the door, I said, watching the blood drain from Arthur's face. My firm's security team has been recording every word, every threat, every mention of the forged signatures. And the moment Julian turned that deadbolt, that's called false imprisonment, a felony. You bitch, Julian hissed, lunging for my throat. I didn't flinch. I didn't need to. From the street 30 stories below, a faint, rhythmic wail began to rise. It grew louder, cutting through the New York traffic, a chorus of sirens screaming toward the building. That's the NYPD, Dad, I whispered, as the blue and red lights began to dance across the ceiling. Your old friends are here. I wonder if they'll be as helpful as they were 10 years ago when they find out you've been defrauding the state's compensation board for $250,000. Arthur's hand stayed frozen in midair. The extinction burst was over. The parasite had realized the host was no longer edible. It was poisonous. The pounding on the mahogany door was rhythmic and absolute. NYPD, open up! The sound shattered whatever remained of Arthur's composure. He looked at the door, then at me, then at his hands as if he didn't recognize them. Julian, the hero, retreated into the kitchen, his face pale and sweating, his grip on the deadbolt vanishing as if the handle had turned white hot. Ilara, wait, Eleanor whispered, reaching out a trembling hand. We can talk about this. We're family. Don't let them in. We can fix the ledger. The ledger is closed, Mother, I said, stepping toward the door. And the audit is final. I reached past a paralyzed Julian and turned the deadbolt myself. The door swung open to a sea of dark blue uniforms and the sharp, clinical glare of tactical flashlights. I didn't look back as I stepped into the hallway, leaving the suffocating perfume of the penthouse behind. Ma'am, are you injured? A young officer asked, his hand hovering near his holster as he peered into the chaos of the living room. I'm fine, I replied, my voice as steady as a heartbeat. But you'll find the evidence of insurance fraud on the table, and the digital logs for the identity theft are on the cloud server I've already shared with your precinct. As I walked toward the elevator, I heard the metallic click of handcuffs. I heard Arthur trying to use his old rank, barking names of captains who had probably long since forgotten him. I heard Julian's voice rising in a high-pitched, pathetic whine, blaming everyone but himself. For the first time in 10 years, those sounds didn't make my chest tighten. They sounded like background noise, like a television left on in an empty room. 1 month later, Seattle, Washington. I sat on the balcony of my new apartment, a modest, airy space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Puget Sound. It wasn't a glass tower built on guilt. It was a sanctuary bought with my own clean, hard-earned money. My phone chimed. It was an encrypted email from my legal team. Subject, case update. State of New York versus Vance, et al. Judgment enforced. Bankruptcy, liquidation of the Manhattan property is underway to satisfy the clawback from the Victim Compensation Board. Arthur and Eleanor Vance have entered a plea deal, 5 years probation and full restitution. Julian Vance is facing 3 years for felony identity theft and fraud. I closed the laptop. I didn't feel the surge of revenge the movies always promise. I felt something much heavier and more valuable. Balance. I reached into my bag and pulled out a brand new ledger. It wasn't leather-bound or greasy, with the fingerprints of desperate men. It was a simple black notebook with crisp, white pages. I opened it to the first page and picked up a pen. I didn't write down a debt. I didn't write down a grievance. I wrote down a single number, the total value of my liquid assets, safely tucked away in an index fund where no parasite could ever touch them. Underneath it, I wrote a single word: sovereign. The blood debt was paid, but not with my life or my future. It was paid with the truth. The sun began to break over the Olympic Mountains, turning the water into a sheet of hammered silver. I inhaled the salt air, cold, sharp, and entirely mine. I wasn't an asset to be liquidated. I wasn't a ghost in someone else's story. I was Ilara Vance. And for the first time in my life, I was out of the red. Family should be a support system, not a debt trap. Don't let obligation turn you into an ATM for someone else's mistakes. Choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's survival. Stay sharp, and don't let anyone hold your future hostage. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and subscribe to catch our next dramatic update. See you in the next one.